Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thank you for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Roy Silverstein, who is an engineer based out of San Diego, and he runs a studio called Rarefied Recording. And in this chat, we get into a really interesting conversation all about Roy's journey to owning his studio and to going full-time in the industry. And I think that Roy's story is very similar to a lot of people's stories of having a good paying day job, but also having this true passion for audio production and wanting to be in the studio business and struggling with the golden handcuffs of having a nice job. And I know that a lot of people are really trying to figure out how to make that transition work and what things they need to prepare themselves for so that they know when the right time to jump all in is. And so in today's interview, Roy definitely gets into his story and shares a lot of great advice as to how he did it and some things that you need to be aware of if you're going to start your own studio in order to feel like you actually made the right decision. So Roy gets into some really great detail, and he shares some amazing tips all about starting your studio, marketing it, and also keeping track of your metrics, which I know for some people, like, some of us aren't very analytical people, but when you hear Roy explain how he uses metrics in his business, I think it's a really important thing that you need to pay attention to if you want to be successful in this industry. Because it's not just about having the audio skills and being able to create great mixes. It's about actually being able to sustain yourself and make a proper living. And to do that, you need to have a little bit of a business sense. And Roy definitely gets into some great tips as to what you should be paying attention to so that you can be successful. Now, beyond talking about running your own studio, we also get into a really interesting conversation all about creating depth in your mixes. And we talk about how to use reverbs properly so that they're not creating mud in your mixes, and how to make your mixes sound exciting using things like automation and parallel processing and a whole bunch more. So I think you're going to get a ton of really great tips from this episode. So let's just jump right into it. Roy Silverstein, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going, man?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. For people who might not be familiar with you and who you are, what you do, can you give us a background on all that and how you got into music and all the cool stuff you're up to?
Okay, yeah. I am Roy Silverstein. I am the owner and chief engineer at Rarefied Recording in San Diego, California. My whole kind of journey through this started back when I was probably about 16. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois. It's just north of Chicago. And I was, playing music with my friends in the basement. And this was like the 90s. So it was the whole exciting time of Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and all that alternative rock and so forth. And so we were kind of like emulating those people. And just trying to do the band thing, but like we wanted to record ourselves, and we literally just had like this like dictaphone type of thing that my stepfather used for his notes, because he was a psychiatrist, and he would like just speak into that, and someone would like type it up as notes. Then we were trying to use that to record, which sounded terrible. But luckily,
we all start somewhere.
Yes. Luckily, the drummer's dad was a musician, and he had a 4-track, which he wasn't using for some reason. So it was a cassette 4-track, and the drummer brought it over, and I kind of just kept it. And I was like, "Yeah, this is cool. I'm gonna figure this out." And it was a Tascam Porta 2 or something like that, and I literally just read the manual like very carefully. It was a pretty good manual. And started recording. Initially, kind of just whatever, my own songs, and the band I was in kind of broke up. But like me and the main songwriter Joe Mahalka, he and I kind of did our own version of the songs, kind of that we were working on with this band that we had started. And so we kind of did a little recording project in high school. and we made some tapes and sent, just gave them out at school and stuff like that. So it was, a very DIY time. Like I had like the laundry room set up as kind of a control room. Like my, I just somehow figured out how to use my like stereo system, which is one of those like Japanese, like Aiwa, like, dual cassette CD. I think I had CD at the time. FM AM radio, like, and it had an aux input, and I figured out how to like connect the 4-track to the aux input, and like had the speakers as my monitors. And of course had some crappy headphones too, and bought some crappy mics, and yeah, just had the basement there set up as like a makeshift studio, and just started recording stuff then, and starting to figure it out totally kind of on my own. I don't know. Somehow I figured out like enough to like buy like an Alesis compressor and like an Art multi-effects thing, and I recorded various things, including a band I wasn't even in, and just got bit by the bug of recording and just loved it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but for whatever reason, instead of going to recording school, I decided I would do this program at the University of Miami that is called, they call it audio engineering, but it's really electrical engineering with a specialty in audio. So that was kind of unique because I had like the kind of chops, I guess, in math and science and stuff like that to do the kind of electrical engineering stuff. And then I had the interest in audio. So I don't know. I just figured that might be a good fit for me. I was interested in the technical side of things. So I wanted to learn more. And so I went to that program and, just learned a whole bunch, of course, about very technical things, all the basic, electrical engineering stuff. But then, we had workshops on audio circuits, and we had digital signal processing stuff, and we learned a lot about digital audio, of course. Even one of our professors, Ken Pullman, wrote like this book called like Principles of Digital Audio. He like wrote the book. So like, his tests were crazy because we basically had to like regurgitate his book to him. It's like answers to the test. It's just like your wrist would be in major pain after his test because I did that program. I mean, it's a cool program. There's a sister program in the School of Music, because what I did was in the College of Engineering, and it was very technical, electrical engineering. There's the sister program is called Music Engineering, and it was in the School of Music, and that was more about recording, but you had to have like a principal instrument and all that stuff, which I was a musician, but I never liked practicing, and you know what I mean? But that program, that music engineering program, has seen some pretty big engineers come through it, like Andrew Sheps and Joe Barisi and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. I don't know. I got out of that program, and I ended up getting a job at Qualcomm in San Diego, I didn't know anything about Qualcomm or San Diego or anything, but I was like, it's a job. It's related to audio. I was going to be working with the audio systems group. And basically I was involved in designing audio chips for cell phones. So that was like my main gig, which was cool because it paid well and it allowed me to continue this passion of recording on the side and actually buy some things and save some money, which after like 10 years added up to a fair amount. And I was able to like buy some property and actually hire a studio designer named Wes Lachot. And I was able to do a build out of like a proper studio because I had been doing all this home recording stuff, like in San Diego. I had set up a house. I called it the Habitat. It was just a cool house that I kind of found myself in through happenstance. And that was awesome, but it was on like a big street and there was all these buses going by, and you just get to a certain point where you're just like, I can't work this way, or I'm limited. Like I knew I was limited by the fact that there wasn't proper acoustics of the control room, which was just a bedroom, which I, treated a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of, that's how most people would start, I guess, trying to do something, at least these days, like trying to start something in your own home and, yeah, dealing with all the problems and fun stuff of traffic and just poor construction and all sorts of stuff like that gets in the way, right?
Yeah, I was literally on Broadway. It was like a big street, and like, there would be emergency vehicles coming down, and occasionally, like, it would work out. It'd be awesome. Like, oh, that was perfect timing. That siren in the background sounds so cool and it's perfect. But most of the time, it was not cool.
How many of those sirens did you keep in your recordings?
Probably one or two only out of all.
Hey, that's even more than I thought. So
yeah. So yeah, I did this big build out, and it was like, I'm just going to do this. I don't, I just loved recording so much, and I was doing it as a side gig basically, but I just wasn't sure where it was going to go. But after building the studio, just organically, what happened was, especially the other engineers were contacting me because I had like a basic social media presence about the studio. And so they were finding me and they were like, hey, that's an awesome place. Can I come and do some work there? So I was getting some other engineers like pretty quickly in here, while I was still at Qualcomm, which was cool because the studio was just sitting there. Yeah. And then that got the ball rolling, besides, of course, what I was doing mostly on the weekends. After a couple of years, I was like, man, the calendar's getting kind of full. I don't know. I think I can try this as a full-time gig. And so it was like in 2015, I cut the corporate cord and now I'm just full-time studio guy.
That's amazing. There's a lot to unpack in that story that I'd love to dive deeper into, but I'm curious to know, like, going to that technical school, that audio engineering program, I'm sure that a lot of that information that you learned has definitely translated to working in the studio as well. Like, were you guys did you ever do any recordings there, or was it like very much like the theory and the electronic side of it?
We did do some recordings too. There were some classes they have a studio on campus, and there were some classes where you would go and record and learn more about recording specifically. Yeah.
That's cool. But I imagine like having that technical knowledge would really come in handy in the studio. And, a lot of people would say like, that's a great way into a studio as like a tech or something like that, having that kind of background.
Totally. I found it very valuable. Just simple troubleshooting, which sounds simple, but like, because I have a lot of engineers who come through here and they run into some kind of technical issue, and a lot of times they'll call me. They're just lost. They're like, I don't know. I'm not getting any sound, or this is happening. And I'm just like, I come in, and part of it is because I know my studio so well, but another part of it is just that I understand signal flow so well, and like what that problem probably could be, and like I solve the issues so fast, which is handy, of course. Sure. When I'm engineering as well, it's very handy. I can figure out workarounds or whatever is happening. I can, fix it. And then if there's something that actually is broken, like I can at least take an initial look at it, and be like, oh, well, that resistor looks burned out. Okay. I can replace that. I got my soldering skills, from school and from working at Qualcomm, where we actually had to work with like surface mount components, which was crazier than most audio gear, which is through hole and much bigger. What we had at Qualcomm was like, it started to look like sand at some point. I mean, it was like, what is this grain of sand that I'm supposed to like solder on this circuit board here? But we had help though, man. When it got to that crazy, there's the proto lab, we called it, is like these amazing, mostly women, mostly from Vietnam for whatever reason, like worked in this proto lab, and they could do anything with these tiny components. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How was that experience of working for Qualcomm? Like, did you find that did it actually satisfy that audio craving as well as that engineer side?
Yeah, in some ways, especially at the beginning, because everything was new and there was more to learn, of course. I learned a lot, and I got to do some interesting projects. I even helped design, it was like a car phone basically for like the executive branch of the government.
Oh, wow.
Because one of Qualcomm's businesses was secure communications. So they had a contract with the government for specialized cell phones that did, encrypted phone calls and that kind of thing. So yeah, I like helped develop this like car phone that was basically used by presidents. And I'm probably guessing they replaced it at this point, but I don't know. That's was kind of interesting. Yeah.
It's funny. I heard someone on another interview, I can't remember who it was talking about just Apple and like how intense their audio department is there, and like how they're just like constantly like working on trying to make these chips so much better and stronger. And like, ultimately their goal is that they want to be able to like, you can bring a phone to a concert and record like high quality audio with your phone, and like, that's crazy to me, but I believe that that's something that, obviously there's a lot of consumers that are doing that at concerts and making videos and all that stuff. So like you have to be working on that technology and getting it like really dialed in.
It was very impressive. I mean, I started in 2001 there, and I was there till 2015, right? So I was there for 14 years, and we went from very simple, basic kind of stuff, like, to quality that rivaled what I have in the studio. Like, seriously, like as far as signal to noise ratio, as far as, all kinds of specs, like that we don't talk about that much, but like, what's the ripple of the frequency response, how flat is the frequency response of this converter or whatever, like all that stuff. The specs were really tight. And the designers who made these custom chips basically for phones, like were having to like meet these really tight specs, and they did it. They kept improving it over and over. And so, yeah, I don't know.
That's crazy. And it just keeps getting smaller and smaller too, right? Like, I think about like our studios are full of these giant racks of gear, and like now this technology is just shrinking to like something that can fit in your pocket sometimes.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive how good the quality is coming out of these phones now, at least out of the headphone jack, where you can connect headphones and you can appreciate the audio. I mean, the speakerphones improved too. I definitely worked a lot on that. Like there was what we called speaker protection. It was basically like, how do you drive this thing as hard as you possibly can without breaking it? Because what was happening was these tiny speakers, if you drove them really hard, they could overheat and they basically fall apart, or you could put so much bass into them that the excursion of the diaphragm would exceed what the speaker could handle, and the speaker would break from that. So there was these algorithms that I helped develop, and they were to like push the speaker to its max temperature and max excursion without going over, to like maximize the loudness of the bass response and all that of the speaker. So
that's crazy.
There's pretty sophisticated things going on.
I love hearing about that kind of stuff because it's stuff that a lot of times you don't think about. Obviously someone's doing the work to do it. So it's very cool. And I also, I like talking about this kind of stuff because sometimes there's a lot of people listening to this who they have this like deep passion in audio, and it's, maybe the studio isn't the place that they want to be, but, they want to find other career paths in the industry or put their skills to the test. And I think, totally. something like that is definitely a really cool option that a lot of people maybe haven't thought about. So it's cool to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's very under thought about, because it is audio and there is a need for it. Whether it's Apple or Qualcomm or, I almost got a job at some other manufacturer of chips that's called Analog Devices. There's one called Cirrus Logic. There's different ones that make, analog to digital converters, digital to analog converters, operational amplifiers that are specific for audio, or little Class D amplifiers, all kinds of things, components basically that would go into various devices. And I mean, it's a good job, is all I can say. You come out of as an electrical engineer, you're going to get a job, like pretty much guaranteed, and you're going to get paid well. So it's very different than like coming out of recording school, where your prospects for getting a job like at a studio are almost nothing. And like, if you go at it yourself, you're going to, the struggles and the low pay and all that. So instead you could like do what I did and like immediately get out of school, like get a really high paying job and like, You're still working in audio. It's different though. It's not as creative, but
For sure. But I think that the path that you took is something that a lot of people are trying to do, which is like, they realize that, yeah, you can't necessarily land an amazing job out of recording school. So it's like you might have to have a different career path to start to like save some money, dip your toes into the industry, like, get some clients, that kind of stuff, and just try to run them both simultaneously, right? Like build the snowball of recording clients and while you've got a comfy job or whatever. So I think that is something a lot of people go through. And I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that transition for you, because I know that that's something that a lot of people are scared of in itself too, right? It's like, you got this comfy job, that has like security and all this kind of stuff, then to go into this industry that you may have been like, there's no money in that, like originally maybe that was your thought. Now you're kind of going in that direction. So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that transition for you and what that looked like. It kind of sounded like you built the studio. It sounded like you didn't build it necessarily for yourself at first. It was kind of for other people to rent out. Would you say that's true?
I mean, I did build it for myself. I didn't really know about I didn't even think about the fact that so many people might be interested in using it. Honestly, like I kind of was like, I'm just going to do this because I wanted to and I could. And then it was like, oh, okay, other people want to use it. Okay, well, sure. Let's see what happens here. Yeah. But the transition was difficult. I mean, I'll be honest, because you're right. Like you're working a job like what I was doing. You're getting paid well, and you set up your life around that. I bought this property. Like I had a mortgage now. Like I had a sort of lifestyle, I suppose, that I was used to. Not that I lived too extravagantly, but yeah, it was a very secure paycheck. It was healthcare, all that stuff. So to like go leave that behind and try to do my own thing was scary. And it was even like to the point where I didn't realize it initially at the time, but I was having a physical effect from the sort of fear of that transition as I approached it, as I was like committing to it and coming up to that point where I was going to, tell my boss that I'm going to leave at some point here soonish. Like I was having like, I don't know, trouble breathing sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Like it was affecting me seriously. Yeah, I had to go to the doctor and just check myself out to see like, is there something else going on? And then they're like, anything stressful going on in your life? And I was like, yeah, I'm about to like leave my steady job and do something crazy. And they're like, yeah, okay, maybe it's just that. And yeah, so it was, I think.
But it sounds like deep in your gut, you kind of always knew all along that was where you were meant to go. Because like, I think the idea of like starting a studio, building a studio is a massive endeavor to begin with. And then to be doing that while working somewhere else, like obviously your gut was leaning you towards like, I want to do more of the studio side of things, right?
Yes, definitely. My heart was totally in the studio stuff. All my spare time, my spare energy, my spare thoughts were about recording. They weren't about how can I better my skills as an electrical engineer. Like I wasn't doing that kind of thing where I saw some of my colleagues more focused on that, where they were like teaching themselves like new skills that they would use at Qualcomm, but I was more like teaching myself skills that I would use in the recording studio, which often did not apply to what I was doing at Qualcomm. Yeah, my heart just was in the recording, and I was getting a little burned out at the corporate job. I mean, it's tough, like Qualcomm is a big company. These chips were made in the millions and would go into, Samsung phones and LG phones. And it was a lot riding on like you doing your part right, and everyone is really counting on you. And I mean, everyone's in the same boat as an engineer there. It's like everyone has to pull their weight and try not to miss anything, because you design a chip, you have it manufactured, it comes back, you start testing it. Like anything that is broken to a point where you can't sell it, like means you have to do another revision of the chip. So you can imagine how expensive that would be.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure. And then there's the sort of cycle of design and production, and that cycle started to get shorter. But the feature set and blah 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 would expand. So you're like, okay, we got to do more. We got to put more into this thing, but do it in less time. And that was kind of like how it was going, and it was a lot to keep up with. And yeah, I just couldn't see myself. Yeah, I couldn't see myself staying on that sort of hamster wheel, if you will.
Yeah. So then for you, like, because yeah, again, like there's probably a lot of people listening to this in the same situation. Like, were there like specific goals that you had in mind before completely breaking off from Qualcomm and jumping all into the studio? Or, like at what point did you know, like, okay, now is the time? Because I think, knowing when the right time is always a challenge for most people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, there was this overlap, which is key, I think. I mean, I think if you're going to do this sort of thing, if you can create that overlap, instead of just like being like having the idea of going into recording and then just quitting your job and just like starting like from nothing in the world of recording, like that's not the greatest idea, because you're going to like, be hitting this brick wall of maybe like no income suddenly. So instead, like, I had definitely like gotten the studio all built out and started getting things going in here myself and these other engineers, thankfully. And so I knew that it was time when I looked at the calendar and I had like a month or two that like was really booked up. And I was like, wow, I have like every day something going on at the studio. This is crazy. So, I mean, I did start off with like kind of offering really low rates at first and stuff like that to get people in the door, that helped. There was this overlap that was, I think, important for me, because I'm not the type to just like do something drastic. So I really needed to feel like I wasn't just jumping into nothing, that there was something coming in.
Yeah, that makes
momentum.
Sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
How was, I'm curious to know, like, I think that the other part of this equation for a lot of people too is that they may have the audio skills, but then there's the business skills of starting a studio as well, right? And like, it's one thing to be really good at engineering and to know that you can get great results, but another to like know how to get clients through the door and to like, advertise and market yourself and all that kind of stuff. Was that something that you were also kind of working on as you were at Qualcomm, or was it something that like you kind of just took on once you went all in, or like, how did that look like for you?
Yeah. No, that's a work in progress. I think for sure. Like I kind of just focus more on the technical side of things, of getting the studio running well and improving my, personal abilities as an engineer, which is a never-ending process. The business side of things is something that I'm focusing on more and more, so I can keep this going and maybe expand it one day or whatever. I that would be good advice, I think, for anyone. One thing that I wish I had done, and I wish I had mentioned this when I was on the Working Class Audio podcast. One thing I wish I had done, track metrics, wait, how did this person find me? What genre they work in, and all the kinds of things. How much money did I make from this client, that client? Like, I realized at some point that I had like no data like about how my business was doing, and so only a year and a half ago or so I started actually like tracking these things.
That's actually great advice, and I think that that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. Obviously, it's that thing that it's like the measuring stick of your business, right? It lets you know if you're in the right direction or not. So you said you've been doing it for like the last year and a half or so. What you gave some examples there, but what are some of the other metrics that you typically pay attention to?
How many leads are coming in, and how many of those convert to an actual client? That would be one that I'm interested in. Month to month, how does the income look? Maybe I can identify some trends of months that are slow, like in general, and maybe I'll be able to then offer some sort of sales that month or something like that. You know what I mean? To like try to improve it. So that's stuff that I hope to be able to do, and yeah, seeing the sort of number of leads and the conversion, I think will help me when I decide to do some sort of advertising. I can maybe get a sense of like, well, if I want to make this much more money, then I need to get like this many more leads because this certain percentage seems to be the conversion that I'm getting, and like every client seems to be worth so much. That'd be another metric, is like, well, what's the average value of a client? And then I can maybe make some smart decisions about like advertising or whatever, and try to bring in a certain number of more leads, than knowing that they'll probably lead to X amount of more dollars in the end, you know?
Yeah. No, I love that. And those are all amazing things that people should be paying attention to. It's funny because I can almost hear people on the other end of this thinking to themselves like, but I don't know how to get leads, you know? Like, it's like great to have leads and to be able to be like, I need more. Yeah. But like, you know, the idea of getting people through the door, especially when you're first getting started, that could be a pretty scary thing as well. So I'm curious to learn a little bit about that part of the process for you. Was it just mainly focus on the local community at first, or were you doing any advertising, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done advertising at this point. I imagine that I will at some point, but yeah, for me, it's been heavily word of mouth, which is, you know, okay, that's cool and all, but the other thing that, of course, is working is a little bit is social media. Mostly Instagram seems to be the one that converts the most. Having a good website helps too, and I do get a lot of Google search, you know, as far as where the leads are coming from. Now that I'm tracking these things, I can actually see. So yeah, I think improving the website, trying to make sure it's the best. I mean, completely organically, I'm trying to make sure it's one of the first, you know, pages at the first page of Google. If you search like San Diego recording studio, like I'm somehow there. Like I don't know if I did everything right to make that happen, but I did something right because it is showing up, I think, for most people on the first page.
Well, it kind of makes sense that if you're paying attention to your numbers and you're learning, you're probably optimizing things on your website and trying different things out to see, you know, does this work better than another thing? And, you know, maybe a headline or your forms or something like that. I mean, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth there, but
yeah, there's more I can do in that regard. I mean, shout out also, sorry to mention other podcasts, but the Six Figure Creative podcast, of course, yeah, is one that is one that I've been listening to, and they talk about these kind of things where you can like do A/B tests, and I do use Brian Hood's website builder, easyfunnels.io.
Cool.
So shout out to them. Shout out to also the software I'm using for my business stuff. It's called Sonido, Sonido. And it's a little piece of software that is specific for recording studios to do a lot of things, you know, from contact management to bookings, calendar, you know, invoicing, and all this kind of metrics that I'm tracking with Sonido.
Interesting.
So yeah, I was looking around for something that like was made for studios, and I found them, and they're a young company, small company, but they are doing some good stuff, and it's working pretty well for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love hearing about that kind of stuff, like those tools that just make your job easier. And I think that that's something that, you know, it does help with that transition of like, if you have software that can kind of maybe inform you of the things you should be paying attention to, or just make your life a little bit easier as far as like keeping all of the stats organized, then, you know, it's definitely worth looking into that kind of stuff.
Yeah. If you're liking what I'm saying about metrics here, yeah, it really is helping because all the data's there, and you can run these reports.
Yeah.
At the end of the year or whatever, or whenever you want, you know, and you can start to see like the kinds of things that I'm talking about.
I think a lot of people think that like metrics aren't sexy, but it is pretty sexy when you actually see the growth that you got every year, you know, and you can actually like see the progress that you're making. Like that's what it's all about, right? It's like helping you make those informed decisions so that, yeah, you are seeing growth and you're not just like twiddling your thumbs every day trying to figure out, hey, how do I get someone through the door, you know?
Yeah, it gives you a way to tell if whatever you're trying is working or not.
Totally.
So that's kind of one of my next steps, is to start to try to do something a little more proactive and see what happens. And I'll actually be able to tell if it made a difference, because I'll be able to track like, oh, this lead came in through this ad that I ran. Okay. And I can start to see the impact of those things. So I'm not there yet, but that's something that I'm working on. Yeah.
No, but I love that. I think it's really great to hear that even for you, it's still a work in progress. And I think you've definitely given the listeners a bunch of great ideas as to like what things they should be starting to at least look into if they haven't yet. Right. So that's great.
Cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'd love to transition a little bit from talking from how you got into the studio stuff, but to actually talking about your mixes. And man, I think you do an amazing job with your mixes. And one thing that really stood out to me when I was listening to a lot of the stuff on your website was that your mixes have a lot of depth to them. And when I think of depth, when it comes to your mixes in depth, I don't think that it's depth in the way a lot of people think about depth. Like a lot of people think of depth as like reverb and delay and that kind of stuff. But to me, the depth in your mixes really comes from contrast and from like the differences in volume versus like how bright or dark something is against another instrument. For example, like I found that like with your mixes, your vocals tend to sit really nice and clear in front of the mix. They're loud, they're bright, they sound like they're in your face. Whereas maybe something like your drums might not be as loud in the mix and they're a little bit darker sounding. So that contrast really does create that depth and space in the mix. I don't know, maybe I'm just overanalyzing your mixes, but like, is that something that you're consciously doing?
Yeah, no, for sure. It's important to me. I want my mixes to have that. And then contrast is a big part of it, because that's kind of the only way that you can, quote unquote, fool the listener into appreciating depth, because if you put everything in reverb, it doesn't really do it. It just sounds like it's all far away and washy or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, but by creating some things that are, dry or almost dry, and then other things that have reverb or some kind of delay or whatever, then you create that contrast, then you can appreciate that depth. So that's nothing new. I didn't make that up. It's just,
no, but it is interesting, because I have heard some people make that argument of like, if you have reverb, you should send everything to the reverb so it all sounds like it's in the same place. But I agree with you. Like, I think when you do that, then everything just starts to sound washy, and you don't have that. Maybe you have the ambience to it, but it doesn't have that front to back kind of vibe.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it might be the right thing for the song. I mean, I'm the type that doesn't believe in any rules. So, if for some reason putting everything in one reverb is getting you the sound that you want, then fine, But yes, I think in general, the contrast is key. And also, like, I'll mention, like, sometimes it's not about having some big reverb, but utilizing some of those programs that are just little ambience programs and stuff like that. So there's a little space around something, even if it's, you're trying to make the thing that is kind of close up to you. But if you just put a little bit of like I have a Burkasti M7, and there's, emulations of those or whatever. There's some great ambience programs in there. And you just put that little bit of like space that makes it still sound like it's in a place, but it's close. I find that that's helpful.
Are you talking about like not necessarily using like the typical types of reverb, like a hall or a plate or something like that, but just something that's like more of like an actual emulating a space? Like, is that what you're talking about?
And not a long space, like a very small space. Not like the tail of the reverb is very short. Mm-hmm. It doesn't sound like reverb. It just sounds like, when you hear it, you can tell it's like goes from being like probably how I sound right now, like on this microphone, like completely dead right in your ear, versus like I'm in a room. You know what I mean? But it's not like a big room with a long decay. It's just I'm hearing some ambience around it, which is why they call them ambience algorithms or whatever.
Yeah, that makes
sense.
I
make use of those too, for sure.
I'm with you on that. Like, I think that people really abuse reverbs, and like it's so easy to put a long reverb on something and to be like, oh, that's cool. Like everything sounds cool through reverb, but like the reverb tail can be very problematic in your mix if you like aren't working with the right lengths, and more often than not, I find people just go with too long with the reverb tails, and doing something
Yeah.
shorter, or like, doing something like what you said there of having something that's more representative of actual ambience in a room, like that's going to
Right.
give you a shorter reverb time, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? So
Yeah. It doesn't sound like reverb. It sounds like something else, but
yeah.
it's cool. And the other thing that I'll do, because I actually have a real plate reverb, which helps because they sound amazing. But you EQ the plate, okay? Because it's like by default, it's a little bit bassy and stuff like that. So the way I usually do it is, an aux send from my console through an EQ, and then this like digital delay, Eventide DDL 500, just as a pre-delay kind of thing. And then EQ to taste, pull out a lot of low end a lot of times, add some mids maybe, or, and the highs might be cut or might be boosted. So you can EQ reverbs. And that's a cool thing to do because that helps you let it sit in the mix better,
Totally. Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about your mixes and how that contrast of bright versus dark, that does create that depth in there. So you can use EQ to achieve the same effect on your effects, reverb, delay, whatever it is, right? So
yeah, I'll EQ a delay too.
very
Sure.
cool. How, as far as creating contrast, would you say that you are mindful of that in even the recording stage and like your microphone selection and that kind of thing? Or is it something you tend to deal with afterwards in post?
I'm mindful of it. Yeah. I mean, I track with some intention behind everything I'm doing. So I'm tracking with outboard gear. I'm committing to EQ, and that sort of thing, compression, and trying to listen to what's coming in against what's already there. So if we're doing an overdub or whatever, and okay, well, I need to maybe get rid of a lot of lows on this instrument. Maybe needs to be more about the mids, So I'll just go ahead and like do that kind of thing. So that just makes it easier at mix time because it's already sounding closer to what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, making space for things is important.
For sure. Yeah, I think that there's this all like one of the more common mistakes I see a lot of beginner engineers make is that they feel like there's one way to record everything, and like you just record it as pristine as possible, and then you fix it afterwards. And it's like, well, no, if you know what you want it to be, like let's get it right at the stores, right?
Yeah, all the great engineers say the same thing. So I just follow their lead, and I just I'm just going for it. I'm gonna commit some stuff and go with my gut.
Absolutely.
A lot of it is your gut. You got to trust yourself at some point. And you'll make mistakes. I totally have made mistakes. I still probably make mistakes sometimes. But you can compensate a lot of times at mix time, but, kind of opposite EQ of what you did or whatever, So yeah, I would say like, go for it, commit some EQ, some compression, and you'll get better as time goes on at those decisions.
For sure. You kind of have to make those mistakes early on to learn when you've gone too far or what worked and what didn't, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Make those mistakes early in your career.
Yeah.
I did a lot of recording for free or for really cheap at the beginning with just my friends and stuff like that. And I mean, they weren't all the greatest recordings. I was still learning and I still am. But like, it was important that I did that at that time because now I'm a little better and I don't make as many terrible mistakes as I did back then,
Totally.
So yeah, my advice is to anyone who's starting out on this is record as much as you possibly can, whoever you can, and just practice all that and just try things.
Love it. So when you start a mix, what is your typical mindset going into it? Like, do you have a specific approach to how you deal with all your mixes, or is it, like you said, just kind of being like trusting your gut and just going with whatever comes to your mind?
I usually do start with like the rhythm section, the drums and stuff like that, because I do kind of fall into that category of feeling like there needs to be this like foundation that things sit on. So I'll start with drums and then bring in the bass, and then whatever like the main instrument is, whether that's guitar or keyboard, piano, whatever, and then the vocal. So that's like the basic song, right? Is like drums, bass, whatever instrument is the most important instrument of the song, and the vocal. And if you can get that like starting to sound like something good, then all the other little things that might be in the production that was recorded, like you can deal with around the most important stuff. That's how I usually approach it.
That makes sense. Yeah, because then once you have that foundation of the core elements of that mix, then you know when to make things darker or brighter or, you know, quieter or louder or whatever you need to do to make it fit with the rest of the context of the mix, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. All that. What one engineer told me was window dressing. Like he's like, you know, what's the real stuff here and what's the window dressing? So there's the window dressing stuff is like what you can play around with and you find where it fits amongst the meat of the song, you know?
So yeah, totally makes sense. So in your opinion, then, what ultimately makes a great mix?
Well, I mean, for me, I like things that feel like they're filling up the whole frequency spectrum, you know? They have everything and the lows and the highs and everything in between. And I do like dynamics. So I really hate hearing a mix that's always at the same volume. And I also hate hearing a mix that just feels like it's band limited or like everything's kind of smashed together and it's just like all just coming at you out of the center. Like, you know, that's not to me a very interesting sounding mix. Like I want to feel like there's this you know, full bandwidth and the depth that we talked about before too, and things that an ebb and flow, right? An ebb and flow to the song, and this, it's kind of like a journey, you know. I feel like that you bring the listener on, and so part of your job as a mixer is also to be highlighting the right thing at all times, whether that's the vocal, which is obvious, or when the singer's not singing, it could be the guitar part, or it could be a little bass run, or a drum fill, or a little keyboard part, or whatever it is, and drawing the attention where it needs to go. So your mix continually brings the listener in and never lets them get bored. That's important to me too.
I love that. It reminds me of one of my previous guests, Chris Shaw. He had a great tip. He said very much the same thing of like, you always have to have that focal point at all sections of the mix. And his thing was like, what's the element of the song that people are going to be singing? Like if you told someone to sing the song to you, what is it that they're going to do, right? Like, and he was saying like, you know, you take "Smells Like Teen Spirit" for example. You got like da 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 boom ba da boom ba da boom ba da, right? Like you kind of just like there's like these key points in the song where you just like, you know what that focal point is, and like as long as you can keep that in mind as you're mixing, you know how to automate your mixes and make room for the important elements.
Totally, yeah. And then having the rise and fall of the levels in general, like, helps your mix not be fatiguing. I just hate when I hear something that's just constantly at one volume and it just, you know, way too loud, and it's just like, turn this off, you know. Having like things come up and down, it draws you in, you know. You're like, oh, what's happening? Oh, okay, it's getting quiet now. Okay, oh, and then boom, you know, big thing happens and it's exciting and it's, you know, knocks you awake again. So I don't know. There's something about dynamics that are important for sure. And I think I might have been listening to one of the other guests talk about like, it's okay for something to just like be way too loud, which is like kind of true. Like sometimes like, cause it's like that makes it makes it exciting.
Totally. So I imagine that automation plays a big role in the mixes that you make.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm not the type to just set one level and then let it be that for the whole time.
Yeah.
There's automation of levels going on. There's automation of equalization. You know, sometimes it just, something has to change and sound at certain parts. So yeah, I use automation. I'm lucky enough to have the mixing board that I did get, which is a Neve Genesis. And it has a automation package for it, which you can control from a plugin, which is amazing. So I just pull up a plugin for every channel I'm using, basically, and I can just like I automate any plugin, I can automate the fader level. I can also automate things like turning the aux send on and off. And there's 4 monos and 2 stereos. I can turn them on and off. I can turn inserts on and off. I can control the level of the effects returns. I can control the master fader. I can control the subgroup levels. So I do that kind of stuff a lot, which is really cool. And I can actually automate the EQ, which is really amazing. Like,
That's
I can
very
automate an analog EQ, just as you would a digital one.
That's amazing.
I'll use Pro Tools stuff too, Pro Tools automation as well. It just depends on the situation and what it calls for.
Yeah. So as far as creating that excitement and getting away from having that static level in a mix, are there any go-to things that you normally think about when it comes to automation time? Like any specific typical moves that I guess you use?
I mean, there is the feeling that you want to have usually of a chorus lifting up, right? So you can use master fader automation, for instance, if it comes down to it. Sometimes the way that the things were played, like, you don't need to do this. But sometimes the musicians are not playing with dynamics in mind as much as they maybe should have. So they kind of just play it straight from verse to chorus, and it just doesn't lift in the way that you want it to. So you can do, if you need to, master fader automation. Bring it down in the verses a little bit and bring it back up in the choruses. That's very powerful, and it can really, a simple way to really, make that chorus pop. That's something that I'll do, or maybe there's a moment where it really wants to come down further or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Again, I guess that's creating that contrast, right? It's like quiet verse, loud chorus. That's makes it more exciting, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the quiet loud thing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's product of being growing up as a teenager in the 90s, and there was a lot of music that had the quiet loud thing. And it's awesome. I mean, it's so simple, but it's effective.
Well, yeah, I mean, the quiet loud thing can also be just like arrangement wise. There's lots of different factors that can go into it, but I think our ears are kind of conditioned to like hearing a little bit of that kind of excitement, otherwise, like you said, it's just kind of, it's all one level, and it gets boring after a while. You're just like, cool, I've already heard that guitar tone. Nothing's new, nothing's exciting popping out at me, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's just, you start to tune it out. Yeah, I mean, we are, as humans, I think, partially conditioned to look for something new, right? Like we're always looking for something out there. It's the way we evolved, right? Like some danger or something like that. So if you can create those kind of things where you're shifting things on people, it keeps them engaged. And we're really good about tuning things out when they're always the same. I mean, that's how background noise is, right? It's like, people don't realize that their refrigerator makes a crazy hum because they just get used to it, and then someone else comes in and is like, man, your refrigerator is loud. It's like, really? I had no idea. Because people get used to those kind of background sounds and just tune them out. So you don't want your music to be background sounds. You don't want it to be like that, You want it to be shifting. Yeah. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And it was interesting because I was checking out your website and you had some really good examples of kind of like the before and after of a demo versus a mix. And that was definitely one of the things that stood out to me with your mixes, is that like, you hear these demos where everything's kind of just in one place and very narrow. And then, your mixes would have like this excitement and this width, and, things might be bouncing back around, like back and forth between different speakers and stuff like that. I just, it's that ear candy that keeps the mix exciting. And like, that's what you want ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, we got to make use of everything we can. I mean, I'm still just mixing 100% stereo. I haven't ventured into the Atmos world, but I mean, you can do a lot with the left and the right speaker, right? And you can make things move around and utilize all the space. Like I hear too many mixes that are just like too much stuff up the center, and like not making use of what is possible with the two speakers.
Yeah. So, yeah. I'm curious to get your take. Are you like an LCR kind of guy where everything is like 100% left or right or center, or are you okay with like putting things in between? I'm
okay with in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm I like to find wherever it feels like it's working the best, you know? So
Makes sense.
yeah, I'll make use of the in-betweens for sure.
Cool.
And I'll make use of, I've been playing around with these plugins that, you know, like this one called like Energy Panner, where it just kind of moves things in weird ways depending on like the energy of the track. And that's fun. I don't know.
One of my favorite plugins is Soundtoys Pan Man. Like I love using that and just like, you know, have one element in the mix that like is just constantly every 2 bars, like switching from left to right or just gradually moving. And I think that you can create so much cool excitement out of that, you know, just, or, you know,
Totally.
if you're wearing headphones, it's exciting and it's different. So yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. I like that one too.
Yeah. How long would you say it takes you to typically finish a mix?
It takes basically a day. Yeah. I don't know if that's good or bad, but for me, that's my process ends up being like basically spending a day on it. And then there's going to be some sort of revision most likely where I spend some more time on it. But yeah, I basically book out a day to do a mix. And if I've done my job right, I've done all the sort of mix prep ahead of time. Don't always get to that, but that's the best practice if you can, is some other time before the day of your mix, you have it all prepped and ready to go. As far as like for me, since I'm mixing on a console, like, you know, routing out the different elements to whatever output I want them to go to. That's a very important step for me to figure out, because sometimes there's more tracks than I have channels. So sometimes I have to subgroup things in Pro Tools, you know, and that takes some thought, you know, to see like, well, what should be subgrouped and what shouldn't be.
Yeah. Would you, because I guess if you're working in the analog domain, then definitely, it is a little bit slower because you're, you know, physically hooking up some stuff sometimes. And also, like you said, you might have limitations of your board track counts and that kind of thing. So, you know, it will change from mix to mix. Do you template any of your analog setup?
I'll put it this way. In some ways it's a template because I have go-tos, you know. I have kind of a chain that I typically use for like the whole mix. So lately that's been this like smart C1 compressor, which is like an SSL bus compressor clone. And my pair of like the new Pultecs, the new company that actually is called Pultec, a pair of those. That's kind of everything's going through that. So I'll hook that up at the beginning, and I'll usually put like the SSL, the smart actually in a certain setting that I know is a good starting point, you know, because I'd like to like, you know, hear right away, you know, instead of like putting it on at the end and everything changes, you know, I'd rather mix into it, you know. So I have like those two things, and I typically have also been doing some interesting things in parallel with outboard gear. So the Neve Genesis has this what they call it IMR. I think it stands for like input mix return or something like that. It's basically like a way to like do a parallel process on your whole mix and then blend it in underneath the regular mix. It's not wet dry, but it's just like blending in something that you've processed differently of your whole entire mix.
Cool.
So I've been using a pair of these, the company called Animod, and they make this compressor. It's in 500 series called the AM660, and it's basically trying to sound like a Fairchild 660. So I have a pair of those that I use with the IMR thing, and I kind of blend in at some point. It's not something I have on right away, but I have it set up and ready to go, where I'm going to at some point blend in this like kind of compressed version of the mix underneath, which adds a lot of weight and girth to things. And then also, at some point, I had been using the black box plugin on the entire mix, and I liked it so much that I decided to buy the hardware. But the hardware doesn't have a wet dry knob, which I thought was important because when I was using it in the plugin form, I was using only 20, 30, 40% or whatever. And I could have used the IMR path that I have, but I kind of was used to the black box being after this AM660 thing that I was using. So I got this other thing that I've been using as a blender. It's by TK Audio. It's called the MB1, and now they have a newer version that looks kind of cool. And I've been using that to blend in my hardware black box underneath the whole mix. So I'll have that like kind of set up and ready to go. And And so that's a bit of a sort of template that I've been using lately, that I kind of hook up, at the beginning, and certain things are, like the compressor is kind of already in a default state, and I'll tweak it if needed, but other things are kind of just ready to go, and I'll get to them at some point, not too late into the mix, because I think it's a mistake to like put everything on at the end and then, well, now everything changed,
Totally, yeah. Well, I was curious about that. Like, you hear a lot of people talk about parallel processing on specific instruments, but to actually do it on the full mix, I know like Andrew Sheps has talked about doing that. He calls it, I think it's his rear bus that he calls it, right?
Yes. Right.
And I'm always fascinated by people who do the parallel thing on the entire mix. It's something I've never tried, but I'm very curious about it because, so it sounds like you're using it mainly as a way to just kind of add some fullness to the mix overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the black box adds a lot of like kind of energy and excitement, because you're adding harmonics. So yeah, there's I feel like the animods are fullness, and the black box is kind of excitement or something.
Yeah. So if you were to solo that parallel chain, like, is it something that sounds fairly close to the actual mix, or would you like say it's a little bit more extreme on its own, but like in combination with the actual mix, it works pretty well?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like I don't know if I've actually even listened in solo so much, especially to the animods.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't really matter. But it matters how it works with the whole thing. But maybe on the black box, because with the TK audio thing, I can put it all the way wet, and then I'm hearing just the black box. So I will actually do that, like initially, and just kind of dial in something that sounds like the mix, but more a little crazy because of all the distortion, and sometimes I have to back it down a bit. But because I'm blending it in the end, just like similar to the plugin, I would, it's usually fine. Occasionally, I'll discover at some point, it's like, man, I think I overbaked it a little bit, and I'll have to back things down. But
that's cool. I like that because when I think of parallel compression or parallel processing in general, I'm always thinking of like it's almost always an extreme that like on its own, at least for me, like I tend to go very extreme with that parallel channel and bring it in just to taste, as opposed to like, just doubling your amplification or whatever, or
no, it's definitely like something's going on with the parallel. Like it's not just the mix and barely changed. It's definitely
that's very cool.
It's something you wouldn't want to hear all on its own. So yeah.
I love it. I like that. I have to do it. I've now heard a couple people talk about it, so I gotta give it a shot. Love it.
Give it a shot. Yeah. There's some stuff I typically use in the plugin world on the whole mix too, that I'll put on and have ready to go, or certain things that are just always there, like the Universal Audio's ATR 102 tape emulation. So that one I'll mix into from the very beginning, and I'll just start with a certain setting that I think is right, probably for the song, because there's a different tape formats or tape formulations that you can try. There's the GP9 and the 456, and there's some other ones, but those are the two that I mostly try. And then there's the tape width you can try, and the calibration settings, and whether the transformer's in or out, and I kind of put it in a setting that I think will probably work for the song, and then I'll come back to that later and maybe see what other settings sound like. But that's usually in there from the beginning. And some other stuff I've been using on the whole mix in the plugin world, I guess, would be Soothe, actually, a little bit. That's not, I don't put it on initially, but at some point I'll turn that on in a very sort of subtle, very broadband but subtle way. So I keep it barely doing anything, but it can make a difference. It can help, clear some things up a little bit, because it's looking for resonances. So if there's some mud or something like that, and then you can focus it in on certain areas. And I've become a fan of that Gullfoss plugin too, that you may be familiar with from Sound Theory, I think it's called, company. And that one's been interesting to put on at some point too. And that one's I find it to be like a demasker, if you will.
Interesting.
How you you have things that step on each other. I mean, that's a tricky thing to figure out as a mixer, is like what is stepping on what. And I do my best to, figure that out as I go. But like sometimes, is inevitably there's certain things that are still doing that. But once I kind of get Golfoss set up right, I find like it's clearing up some of that and demasking things, and things just sound more clear.
Very cool. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it sounds like you're mixing into a kind of a chain that is obviously shaping the tone of your entire mix right from the beginning. So I personally mix that way as well. So I always like hearing other people's approach to it as well. And as far as the Pultecs go, like you mentioned using those, is there anything specific that you like to do with the Pultecs?
Yeah. So usually I will do some boosting in the top end, maybe the 12 kilohertz or the 10 kilohertz setting, with the bandwidth as wide as possible. And because of that boosting, sometimes I find that I actually need to cut the very top end. So I'll set that attenuator at 20 kilohertz, and I might cut a tiny bit of 20K out. So what I did, at 12K doesn't make the stuff way up top too much. And then I'll do the thing on the low end with a low frequency, and sometimes I like the sound of the 30 hertz on the one I have, with some boost there, but also possibly cut at the same time, that whole trick, which just kind of focuses it a little bit better. So that can add some weight to things too.
Very cool. That's exactly how I use it on my own mixes as well. It's like kind of creating that smiley face curve to your mixes before you even start, right? I like it. Because otherwise you're just trying to boost the top end on everything and like hope that you get it right. Yeah,
I don't do it the first thing, but after I get the basic song going, then I'll see, okay, let me try the Pultec, and I'll get that sounding how I think it should sound, and then I just kind of mostly leave it there unless I feel like I need to come back to it,
Yeah, totally. How do you know then when you're done with your mixes?
For me, it would be when I can listen through and nothing's really bugging me anymore, and when then it feels like it's done. And also like when I get around to about midnight, I'm pretty tired. My ears are about toast, and I know I need to call it, even if there maybe is something that's still like I'm not totally sure about. At that point, I just need to start printing the mix and sending it over to the client, and then I know there's probably going to be a round of revisions anyways. So if there's something that's personally bugging me, I can address it then.
Yeah, but I like that approach too. It's like sometimes like it's not a matter of like being 100% satisfied with the mix. Like you might be like really, really close, but you have to send it off to the client anyway, just to like see if you're like, they may have a completely different vision for the mix. So, you got to do that check every now and then, rather than like spend the extra time just trying to get that extra 5% that maybe in the end is not going to make the difference to the customer. Right.
And to that point, what I've learned, because I've run into that before, where I've done all this work and then I send it over and they're like, that's not at all what we wanted. I'm like, oh my God, I just spent a whole day. So what I've started to do is, send over something around, for me, it's around 5:00.
Yeah.
I'll send over like, this is where I'm at with it. And then I take a long break, because I've got a wife and a kid. So like I go home, I, have dinner with them. I help out with the nighttime routine. It, that could be till like 9:00 sometimes. So like there's this long break where the client has my mix in progress, as I call it, and they can send me some notes on that. And then I'll come back like at 9 and I'll be like, okay, I'll do their tweaks and then I'll do whatever else I want to do. And then, like I said, by about midnight, I'm like, okay, I should probably call it quits now. And hopefully I have it in a place that I feel good about.
Yeah. I'm totally the same way. It's like, you just got to get that, take that break, reset, and let the customer tell you if you're in the right ballpark with it or not. Because you might be done.
Yeah, it might be good. There might be just certain things they want tweaked, and great. Now you did that before you sent the official mix 1, and maybe there won't even be a revision now. Like maybe you got it perfect for them, you know, because you took that time to send them this mix in progress. I was scared to do that before because I was like, oh, I don't want to show them something that's not like 100%. But like I said, I learned over time it's better to do that. And say it's a mix in progress. Like, I'm not done here, but you know, this is, you know, a point where you can give me some feedback.
Totally. It's better to maybe set the expectation lower and then over impress them, you know, like not, you know, then hey, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, because I will come back at 9 and with fresh ears, and I'll hear new stuff and I'll do some other stuff, and my mix that I'm done with at the end of the day is significantly better, I think, than the one that I had at 5 o'clock usually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right on, man. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. If people want to learn more about you and your studio, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you could go to the website, which is www.rarefiedrecording.com, or you can check me out on Instagram, just at Rarefied Recording. That's the social media I'm most active on. So I would probably do that one. So yeah, those 2 places would be great ways to find out more.
Awesome. Well, Roy, thank you again for taking the time to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
So that was my interview with Roy Silverstein, and I thought he shared some really awesome advice in terms of how to break free of the golden handcuffs of a comfy day job and how to get into audio comfortably knowing that you can actually make a proper living from it. And I know that it is a scary thing to jump all in and to believe in yourself sometimes when it comes to pursuing your passions. And let's face it, the audio industry is not an easy industry. And so because of that, there are a lot of people that will tell you you're destined to fail and, you know, it's not a good industry to be in, all this kind of stuff. It can very much be doom and gloom, but I think if you set yourself up properly, and if you follow a lot of the advice that Roy shared here today, I think that you're going to have a much easier time and you're going to feel way more comfortable getting into this. You know, I've definitely been there myself. I've definitely jumped all in at one point and realized, oh, wait a minute, I don't know how to market myself. I don't know how to run my business. And it's scary. I failed a couple times doing this myself. But once I actually started having a business-minded approach to my career, that's when everything changed. And a lot of it had to do with these little metrics that Roy was talking about here today. So, you know, definitely if you're someone who is thinking about making this transition and you're not sure what to do, definitely go back into this episode and listen to all the advice that Roy shared here, because there's a lot of great tips. And I think that if you do that, you're going to have a much easier time. So I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you got a lot of great tips out of that. And if you did enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you're not already. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And also make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com if you're looking for tips on how to create pro-sounding recordings from your home studio. If you're not sure about the process, or you're not confident in the tools, or you're just not sure if you're taking the right steps with your own productions, then there are a lot of great resources on that website designed to help you out. So definitely make sure to check that out, MasterYourMix.com. And one resource that I would say is a great place to start is my book. It's called The Mixing Mindset. And in that book, I break down the process of mixing step by step so that you know exactly what to do, what steps to take, what to listen for, all that kind of stuff. So make sure to check that out. It's called The Mixing Mindset, and that's available at MasterYourMix.com. So that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.